Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk about design systems today, and I'm actually kind of curious if any of you has used a design system before, has built one, maybe a few hands there. So I've experienced design systems a few times, and that led me to thinking that they actually have a purpose that I feel is not fulfilled yet. And I'm gonna share some experiences of myself, of my team, because we built our own design system and we built it in such a way that I think it's much more sticking to the agile principles in a way, which I got reminded of yesterday and today, because I'm part of a agile team. We work by the Scrum methodology. I wouldn't say we follow it like precisely by the book, but nevertheless, being in such an environment for the last 4 or 5 years, I kind of lived by it, not really understanding that we were actually doing agile. And I think that my talk is gonna pretty much stick to you even if you haven't experienced design systems yet, because the way I see them and the way I see their purpose is much more different than what's kind of out there. So quickly about myself, I'm a UX architect. I've been doing UX for the past 5 years with Infragistics, the company I currently work for. We've been working on different products, and one of them is the design system that we've built. However, I come from an entrepreneurial background. I was doing a startup that failed before that, and I often enjoy attending conferences either as a speaker or as just somebody who is kind of continuously learning and improving his skill set. And that's what brought me here actually. I applied to ACE last year. My topic was kind of very different, and I'm glad that I was not accepted then, because that helped me actually come this year with a topic that I feel is much more appropriate even for people who are Scrum Masters, product owners. So is the majority here doing Scrum as a Scrum Master, as a product owner? Some developers maybe? Not so many. QAs? Designers? Okay, many designers in the room. So I want to start with a quotation. It's a quotation from the Design Systems book written by Alla Kolmatova, which basically gives us an idea of what design systems are, more or less. And she defines design systems as a set of connected patterns that work for us as practices, as principles to build and to make digital products better, to serve the process of building those digital products. And talking about design systems, it's very often that we see things like consistency, uniformity, clarity of the design, making it more efficient, making or having our design processes more collaborative and more efficient and more productive. And those are many of the things that kind of pop up when we start talking about design systems. So for me, that's kind of the promise that they give, the promise that they try to deliver on. That's not always the case, of course. But when we talk about design systems, that's usually what we expect out of a design system. And the case with design system is that they have been very heavily focused and oriented on the designers. But the way I personally see them is that as a system, they're more of an ecosystem. They're not just for designers, that they can have a much more impactful experience of a team overall. So when I first got introduced to this kind of idea of what design systems are and how they can enable us as, let's say, agile teams or as teams that are kind of combining different skills and different types of expertise, I was in a situation where in my company we were a very distributed organization. So we were split across 3 continents. We were a total of maybe 10 or 15 designers. And we were also sort of a shared resource. So I have been a shared resource across 5 agile teams in our office. and such has been the case with our other designers spread across the globe. So I think nowadays it's more or less common for us to work in a distributed setup. And even if that's not the case, even if we're kind of in our own organization based sitting somewhere here in Krakow, it's very often the case that as designers we are shared resource across different teams. I think the ratio for a designer kind of a company was maybe for, it depends on the size of the company, but if we talk about enterprise companies or larger companies, it's usually a ratio of 1 designer to like 100 developers or 50 developers. So that apparently makes us a shared resource across many teams. And when we look into design systems, and when we actually looked at design systems, maybe that was a year ago. Of course, I updated this slide for today. There were the Lightning design system. Who has heard of Lightning by Salesforce? Okay, a couple of hands. The Clarity design system, I think it was done by VMware, 1 person. Carbon design by IBM, few more hands. Okay, so those design systems are, of course, I added there Indigo.Design, which is the system we've been building for the past 18 months. But looking at those design systems, they kind of deliver the same message. So we have styles, we have branding, which helps us be more consistent. It helps us kind of speak the same design language. We also have a lot of or different UI symbols. We have UI kits, whether they're done for Sketch, for Figma, for XD, for whatever tool is out there. We have this kind of a library concept of tools and kits that we can use out of the box. We have also somewhat tooling around customization, around branding. We have some guidance usually. All of those systems are very well documented, and they tell us what for example, what's the appropriate use of a list component compared to another kind of a design pattern. And we also have, of course, a lot of UI controls, often which kind of try to map or match the UI kit as a kind of a library of different controls. And one of the problems with design systems is actually the controls themselves, because very often they are kind of very limiting to a certain technology. And yeah, looking at design systems and coming back to the definition that Ala gave back a couple of years ago when she wrote her book, we can see the patterns, we can see like those practices, those controls, those components that build up the design system. So they definitely improve our workflow, giving us some, let's say, standards to follow and to live by. But nevertheless, I believe they don't deliver the second part of the message that Ala gave there. And that's why when we were kind of trying to figure out our way to develop a design system, we were actually thinking about design as a more general thing. So I would like to maybe pause for like 10 or 15 seconds to ask you about your own definition of design as a thing. Like, seeing so many hands of designers in the room, how would you define design for yourself? What would it be for you? You don't have to answer loudly, you just try to answer for yourself. If you want to share, feel free to raise a hand and shout it out. But for me, design has always been a process that we follow, whether it's the process defined by the iterations we do, the workshops we do with users, the usability tests we do at the end of the iteration. It's always been a process that very often is a systematic process. So it's not something that we try to follow as a system. And systematic in terms of design system is something that also kind of, it's not just the word there, but it's something that is repeatable, that is iterative, something that makes sense to do over and over again. And for me, design systems have always been, or design as a process has always been about iterating, experimenting, and failing fast in order to actually be able to define this repeatable process, these steps that we can go through over and over and over again until we're actually able to validate and to prove that we have a solution for a problem that really works. And iteration, experimentation, and of course failing until we get to that solution, for me has been what defines designs, what defines systematic processes, and what actually should be at the core of design systems. So if we go back to let's say the concept of a team or the concept of an agile team, we very often have the role of the UX and UI designers who are defining the scope, they're defining some vision, they're building a concept, they're styling it, they're kind of delivering on that process, doing their own kind of iterations. But we also have the product owners and we also have the developers who more or less follow the same approach of iterating, building feature by feature, integrating into the product, having their backlog and trying to squeeze something else, something that brings more value, something that delivers better on the promise of the product. And we're kind of trying to do everything together as a team. A recipe that I believe has not been written in the best possible way yet, because we've all been probably struggling to do more design, to fit more design into Scrum or to fit more design into the processes that we've been following. And for me, actually, design system has to serve the purposes of each of those roles that you see on the screen behind me. So a design system has to be there for the UX designer to help him prototype, iterate, get user feedback, validate, test, and it also has to be there for the UI designer or for the visual designer who wants to define the brand. He wants to give a certain set of, let's say, feel for with the colors, with the typographies, with everything and all the visual tools that he uses. But it also has to be there for the product owner who just maybe wants to sell an idea to the upper management, or he just wants to like build something fast, hack it together, and decide whether that's something that's worth to be pursued in the long term. And of course, it has to be there for the developer. Even though it's a design system, a developer very often interacts with designers, and at least in our organization, for us, delivering has not been kind of a milestone, because I, as a designer, I never deliver to the development team. I give them something to work with. I support them every day, every minute, as much as they need me, as they build the solution. So for me, there is never this kind of a notion of handoff as a milestone or as a moment in time. Handoff is something that is done once the product is out, and maybe not even 100% done then. So a design system has to fit the needs of those agile teams as a team, and it has to serve the needs of each role in the team. And that's what actually we started with, and that's actually what we've been doing, because for us, the most important thing of a design system is that it has to serve the purposes of the digital product. It has to provide the different tooling that the different roles need to be enabled, to be more productive, to be more skillful in what they do. But the goal of the design system is to serve the need of the digital product and to help it fulfill its purpose. So what we have been adding to the design system space with what we've been doing and what we believe should be done, and that's kind of my learning and my experience, and I hope that you're gonna catch on it and kind of take it as your own learnings and build better design system if that's what you've been doing probably, is that we have to be more focused around how we enable people, whether it's UX people, whether it's product owners, to build prototypes, share them with stakeholders, get feedback, or create usability studies around them and get some user feedback out of them, Also, however, enabling through design systems to have this designer to developer handoff process, or at least the initial phase of it, to be more enabling. So for example, for our own design system, since we work with Angular as a technology and the whole design team runs on Sketch, what we've been doing is to kind of connect that process together and enable designers share a link to the developer, from which link the developer can generate running Angular code and have their Angular application in terms of components and everything running. So rather than just giving them pictures or images, we're working with our developers, giving them links that produce the code or the user interface code, let's say, for them, and they just do what they're mostly kind of interested in doing, which is doing the business logic, implementing data bindings, and making the whole thing actually work together, rather than spending as much time writing what we provided as JPEGs or PNGs or whatever we did. And of course, we've been thinking more and more, actually we've been thinking since day one, of how to actually involve the product owners more. And that's something that we've been working on for the past few months. That's why it's kind of more coming, because it's still in a stealth mode. But it's something that we're gonna build in the cloud for product owners. And for me, product owners, Scrum Masters, I kind of tend to put them together under the same hat, because that's how they've been in our organization. We have the kind of combined role of the product owner and the Scrum Master. So for me, they also have to be enabled by design systems to do some prototyping, to do some kind of conceptualization of ideas, and have the tooling that enables them to do so, but also have a tooling which doesn't have them as a separate kind of a role, because the whole concept of Agile is that we want to bring everyone together and get the best out of each person with his own kind of skills, rather than having each one work in his own kind of a balloon or a box or a bubble. So for us, it's always been around trying to deliver those promises, the promises of design systems, like styling, branding, symbols, libraries, UI kits, UI controls, a lot of guidance, a lot of prototyping and usability tests, and that's what we've been doing. And things we learned along this way were like many different things, of course, but one of the best things I kind of came across is that very often we had to go back to the basics, and we had to work with the end goal in mind. So luckily, when we were starting to build our own design system, we sat together and we really thought about what we wanted to get at the end out of it. And that's been done since day one. For like a couple of months, we were only thinking about this. So in our own case, for example, we started with kind of the larger picture. I don't know if you're familiar with Brad Frost. I guess you should be, because he's kind of a very popular developer who came with the concept of atomic design. Any bells ringing or okay? So he defined atomic design as something that so he kind of starts from the smaller things first, explaining us what atoms are, how atoms are combined together to create a molecule, which in our case, if we look in an atom, it could be a simple component, like maybe some label, some avatar, something like that. But combined together with other atoms, you could create more or less simpler layouts already, something like maybe a list or something that's more of a certain type of a form. And then you can kind of combine those molecules to build living organisms, which are actually, let's say, design best practices, like, for example, a profile page or something that's kind of a living in its own kind of universe and context of design. And we kind of caught on this idea. I really love the way Brad wrote his book. And however, we started the other way around. So we started with the organisms first, trying to like split them in molecules and atoms in order to figure out what actually has to be there for a design system to be able to create the organism. And for me, whether you're planning to use a design system or build a design system, you have to think with exactly that mindset. Like, what's the big picture? What is our team trying to enable, and what kind of process are we trying to empower? And start with that kind of picture of the different stakeholders and try to, of course, deliver something for each role that you have in your team. So if we kind of come back to what we did, our design system also has this kind of some smaller pieces, like I call them the subatomic pieces, which are necessary to be there for all the branding, styling, and enablement of the visual designers in our teams, because what they work with most of the time are things like colors, typographies, icons or icon sets. They work with different kind of visual elements in order to make a design live a certain life. And that's also something that we've been kind of heavily focused on. We've been building, for example, plugins that enable us style things in Sketch with just a few clicks, rather than going through all the libraries and doing like the manual labor, no matter what kind of shortcuts we may have in our design systems. But we've been very focused on building those different plugins and different kind of let's say interfaces that help the different roles hand off and share deliverables with one another. So I would like to kind of make one final quote, a quote that's also by Alla Kolmatova in her book, because that's been the vision we've been kind of preaching on and delivering on for the past 6 months, which is that rather than making the small tweaks here and there all the time and being the design system owner who is trying to keeping everything consistent in terms of style, in terms of a theme, in terms of functionality, what we did was something that kind of helped us make small tweaks through a plugin and affect our design system in much more profound ways. So what actually you see on both ends of the screen is the same design, which with just a couple of clicks, one is able to actually completely change the feel and the style of it in a very profound way. So with that, I would like to kind of end my talk and invite you to come over. There's like an Indigo.Design roll-up just by the corner when you go outside. So I'll try to hang out there for the rest of the day. And if you want to talk design systems, or if you want to talk about whether you've had some troubles building your own, or whether you're kind of exploring or investigating whether to use a kind of a stock design system, or whether to start building one of your own right now, and you have some kind of a struggles or questions, just stop by and I'll be more than happy to kind of have a chat and have a conversation. And you can always find me on Dribbble. I would highly recommend these two books. They've been of immense kind of a help for me, to help me start thinking systematically about design and how I can bring all the different people and the whole team together around what we've been doing. So it's definitely a very recommended read. And yeah, that was it from me. So thank you all for being so patient.